NFL owners don't panic often. But right now, there's a quiet sense of chaos spreading across the league. Because John Harbaugh just did something that almost never happens. After nearly 2 decades, a Super Bowl ring, and one of the most stable coaching tenures in modern football, he hit the open market and immediately flipped the power dynamic upside down. Within minutes, teams were scrambling, phones were ringing, agents were fielding calls, and behind closed doors, front offices were realizing the same thing. This wasn't a normal coaching search. This was a negotiation from a position of strength. Reports began circulating about a demand list so aggressive it stunned even veteran executives. Massive salary, full roster control, authority over personnel decisions, even influence over who runs the front office itself. To some, it sounded outrageous. To others, it sounded like a coach who finally understands exactly what he's worth. And then another detail started surfacing. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't even just about control. It was about the situation Harbaugh wants next, and the quarterback he may want to build everything around. Rumors quickly connected his interest to the Cleveland Browns, a franchise desperate for stability and redemption. And once one specific name entered the conversation, the entire story took on a different meaning. Because if Harbaugh lands where many believe he might, he wouldn't just be taking another job. He'd be stepping into the most delicate quarterback experiment in the league, one centered around Shedeur Sanders. And if that happens, this won't just reshape Cleveland. It could reshape how power works in the NFL. But to understand why owners are this uneasy, you have to go back to how this situation even started. The moment John Harbaugh officially became available, the coaching carousel didn't just spin, it exploded. This wasn't some coordinator testing the market. This was a Super Bowl winning coach with nearly 2 decades of credibility suddenly free to choose his next destination. And almost immediately, the league understood the uncomfortable truth. Harbaugh wasn't going to beg for a job. Teams were going to beg for him. According to multiple reports, within less than an hour of the news breaking, agents and front offices across the NFL were already reaching out. Not casually, urgently. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. What would it take? That's when the demand list started circulating. $20 million per year. A $10 million staff budget. Final authority over roster decisions. And the ability to select the personnel executive he would work with. For some owners, that list sounded reckless. For others, it sounded like a man who learned every lesson the hard way and wasn't willing to compromise again. Because if there's one thing Harbaugh's tenure with the Baltimore Ravens proved, it's this: stability wins, but only when the coach actually has control. Behind the scenes, there's growing belief that Harbaugh's exit wasn't just about playoff disappointment. Reports suggest there were internal disagreements about staff continuity, roster philosophy, and how much influence the coaching staff should truly have. When Harbaugh wanted to run it back with his people, the organization hesitated, and that hesitation changed everything. Now, instead of negotiating quietly, Harbaugh flipped the script. He made it clear he wouldn't even sit down unless teams were prepared to meet his terms. Not some of them, all of them. That immediately narrowed the field. Franchises with tight ownership structures backed away. Teams unwilling to surrender power quietly disappeared from the conversation. And suddenly, only a handful of organizations remained realistic contenders. Teams desperate enough, humbled enough, and bold enough to consider handing the keys to one man. That's where the Cleveland Browns entered the picture. Because Cleveland isn't just searching for a coach, they're searching for an identity reset. Years of instability, questionable decisions, and public embarrassment have taught ownership a brutal lesson. Half measures don't work. And when your last big swing backfires, the next one has to be different. But here's the twist most people missed. Harbaugh's demands weren't designed to scare teams away. They were designed to attract the right one. And the team willing to say yes might already be closer than anyone expects. This is where the conversation stops being hypothetical and starts getting very real. Because while plenty of teams like the idea of hearing a big-name coach, very few are actually built to give someone the level of power John Harbaugh is demanding. And that's exactly why Cleveland keeps surfacing in every serious discussion. Ownership there has already crossed lines most franchises refuse to touch. They've paid historic guarantees. They've absorbed public backlash. They've lived through front office disasters that became league-wide punchlines. When you've already experienced that level of failure, fear stops being a deterrent. According to reports, Jimmy Haslam is willing to go into a full bidding war if it means landing the right leader. That alone separates Cleveland from half the league. But it's not just about money anymore. It's about control and whether ownership is finally ready to step back. Harbaugh's demand for final say on personnel isn't random. It's a direct response to the modern NFL power struggle, where analytics departments, executives, and ownership committees often override football minds. Coaches get blamed when things fail, but they don't always get authority when things matter. Harbaugh doesn't want input, he wants responsibility. That's why the most controversial part of his list isn't the salary or even the staff budget. It's the insistence on choosing who he works with on personnel, not necessarily replacing everyone, but ensuring alignment. No mixed messages, no silent power battles, one vision, one direction. For Cleveland, that's uncomfortable. Their current structure gives significant influence to the front office, and any shift would mean admitting the existing system hasn't worked. But the alternative is even more uncomfortable, staying stuck in the same cycle that's defined the franchise for decades. And here, where things get even more interesting. Harbaugh isn't just looking for control in a vacuum. Reports and league whispers suggest he's looking for the right quarterback situation to justify it. A young player he can mold, someone not yet broken by instability, someone whose ceiling hasn't been capped by bad habits. That's why rumors keep circling around Shedeur Sanders. Nothing is confirmed, no deal is signed, but insiders say the appeal is obvious. A quarterback with confidence, intelligence, and market pressure already baked in. A player who won't shrink under authority but respond to it. If Harbaugh gets total control, he doesn't just inherit a roster, he builds an ecosystem. And the next question isn't whether Cleveland can afford him. It's whether they're brave enough to let him actually run the show. This is the point where the entire situation takes on a completely different meaning. Because John Harbaugh isn't just shopping for power, he's shopping for timing. And more importantly, he's shopping for a quarterback worth staking his legacy on. That's where Shedeur Sanders enters the conversation. League chatter suggests Harbaugh isn't interested in patchwork solutions or short-term fixes. He's already done the win-now approach. He's coached veterans. He's managed locker rooms full of egos. At this stage of his career, the appeal is different. He wants to build something clean, something he can shape from the ground up. Sanders fits that profile in a way few young quarterbacks do. He's confident but not overwhelmed by attention. He's been under a microscope since college. He's handled media pressure, expectations, criticism, and hype long before entering the NFL. That matters more than people realize. Most young quarterbacks crumble under that weight. Sanders grew up inside it. From a football standpoint, he's still moldable. He hasn't spent years in a dysfunctional system picking up bad habits. He hasn't been forced to survive behind broken offensive lines with rotating coordinators every season. For a coach like Harbaugh, that's gold. And that's why the demand list suddenly makes sense. The $10 million staff budget, that's about surrounding Sanders with elite quarterback developers. The roster control, that's about protection, receivers, and a run game designed to take pressure off a young QB. Selecting personnel leadership, That's about ensuring everyone in the building is aligned around one priority: quarterback development. This isn't ego, it's insulation. And it also explains why Harbaugh is being so selective about interviews. He's not interested in franchises that want him to fix things while tying his hands. He wants a situation where success or failure rests on football decisions, not politics. For Cleveland Browns, that creates a rare crossroads. They can chase another conventional hire and hope for marginal improvement, or they can hand the reins to a proven coach and fully commit to a new direction built around a young quarterback. Nothing about this is guaranteed. Sanders still has to prove it on Sundays. Harbaugh still has to adapt to a changing league, but the alignment is hard to ignore. And that's why this isn't just another coaching rumor. It's a potential reset button, one that could redefine both careers if it actually happens. At first glance, the Shedeur Sanders connection feels almost too convenient. A bold young quarterback, a power-hungry, championship-proven coach. On paper, it looks like destiny. But dig a little deeper, and it becomes clear why this pairing has league executives quietly uneasy. This isn't just about football talent, it's about control. Sanders entered the NFL with something most rookies don't have: leverage. Long before he took a regular season snap, he had brand equity, market value, and national recognition that outpaced his draft position. That alone rattled traditional power structures. Quarterbacks are supposed to earn influence slowly. Sanders showed up with it already built. Now imagine that kind of player paired with John Harbaugh, a coach demanding total authority. To some owners, that combination sounds dangerous. To Harbaugh, it sounds efficient. Insiders suggest Harbaugh doesn't see Sanders as a risk. He sees him as a stabilizer, a quarterback who won't be intimidated by hard coaching, a player who understands preparation, accountability, and expectations because he's lived with them his entire life. Sanders isn't learning how to lead under pressure. He's been doing it since college, with cameras always on and critics always loud. That matters in a locker room. One of the biggest issues young quarterbacks face is credibility. Veterans test them, coaches protect them, front offices hedge. Sanders walks in differently. His presence already commands attention, whether people like it or not. Pair that with a coach whose authority is unquestioned, and suddenly the power structure becomes very clear. Coach leads, quarterback executes, everyone else falls in line. That clarity is exactly what franchises like the Cleveland Browns have lacked for years. Mixed messaging, competing voices, short-term thinking. Harbaugh's demands eliminate all of that in one move. But there's another layer people aren't talking about. Sanders represents the future of player empowerment. Harbaugh represents the old-school standard of discipline and structure. On the surface, those philosophies seem like they should clash. In reality, they might balance each other perfectly. Sanders brings confidence and modern influence. Harbaugh brings boundaries and expectations. If it works, it's not just a football success story, it's a blueprint. And that's exactly why this connection has become the most controversial part of the entire coaching saga. Because if a coach gets full control and a young quarterback thrives under it, the rest of the league will be forced to rethink who really holds the power. And that's when things get uncomfortable. This is the part of the story that rarely gets said out loud. Because the anxiety spreading through league offices isn't really about John Harbaugh asking for a massive salary. Owners can handle money. It's not even about a coach wanting control. That's happened before. What has executives uneasy is what this combination represents if it actually works. A powerful coach, a confident, high-profile young quarterback, and an organization willing to step back. That's a shift. For decades, the NFL has been built on fragmented authority. Coaches coach, general managers manage, owners oversee. When things go wrong, blame gets passed around, contracts get terminated, and the cycle resets. What Harbaugh is proposing disrupts that entire system. If a franchise like the Cleveland Browns hands full control to a coach, and that coach successfully develops a quarterback like Shedeur Sanders, the implications go far beyond one team. Suddenly, other elite coaches will start asking the same questions. Why should I take the blame without the authority? Why should I inherit someone else's mess? Why shouldn't I control the people responsible for building my roster? And if that happens, owners lose leverage. That's the real fear. Because once one franchise proves that stability plus autonomy equals results, the old committee approach starts to look outdated. Front offices become negotiable, power structures get challenged, and the balance shifts away from ownership micromanagement toward football leadership. There's also a generational concern. Shedeur represents a new type of quarterback, one who understands his value beyond the field. Branding, influence, public perception. Pairing that with a coach who has the credibility to demand excellence creates a model where players aren't controlled through fear of replacement. They're aligned through purpose. That's dangerous for a league that prefers predictability. It's why some reports have tried to downplay the seriousness of Harbaugh's demands. It's why speculation gets framed as unrealistic or clickbait. And it's why certain voices are quick to say, no owner would ever agree to this. But history says otherwise. Every major shift in the NFL started with one team willing to look reckless before it looked smart. Free agency, rookie wage scales, guaranteed contracts. They all began with resistance and ended with adoption. If Cleveland says yes, it won't just be hearing a coach. It will be testing a new power model. And whether that experiment succeeds or fails will determine how much control coaches and quarterbacks have in the next era of the league. At some point, speculation turns into pressure, and that's exactly where the Cleveland Browns are right now. This franchise has spent decades chasing quick fixes. New coaches, new systems, new quarterbacks. Every reset came with promises and every collapse came with excuses. But what's happening with John Harbaugh is different. This isn't about hope, it's about commitment. Harbaugh isn't asking Cleveland to believe in potential. He's asking them to believe in structure. If the Browns say yes to these demands, they're not just hearing a coach. They're admitting something uncomfortable, that the way they've operated hasn't worked. Granting roster authority, staff autonomy, and personnel alignment would be an acknowledgement that football decisions should finally be made by football people. That's a hard pill for ownership to swallow. Because once you hand over that level of control, there's no hiding. No scapegoating the coach while protecting the front office. No quiet reshuffles behind the scenes. Success or failure becomes clear, visible, and traceable. And that's exactly why this decision matters. For Cleveland, saying no means staying safe, hearing a more traditional candidate, keeping power structures intact, preserving control while hopping results magically change. It's familiar, comfortable, and historically ineffective. Saying yes, though, means risk. It means trusting a coach enough to let him build the team his way. It means committing to a long-term vision instead of a short-term fix. And it means fully embracing a quarterback-centered future where development takes priority over optics. That's where the Shedeur Sanders factor becomes impossible to ignore. Sanders represents youth, confidence, and long-term upside, but only if the environment supports him. Cleveland has already seen what happens when a quarterback is dropped into chaos. Harbaugh's demands are essentially an insurance policy against repeating that mistake. The irony is impossible to miss. For years, analysts said Cleveland needed stability, needed patience, needed leadership. Now, when a proven leader asks for exactly what would create that stability, the price suddenly feels too high. But the truth is simpler. Cleveland isn't deciding whether John Harbaugh is worth $20 million a year. They're deciding whether they're ready to stop being who they've always been. Because if they pass on this, another franchise won't. And the moment Harbaugh succeeds somewhere else, with control, alignment, and a young quarterback thriving, the question won't be, why didn't it work in Cleveland? It'll be, why didn't Cleveland have the courage to try? When all the noise fades, this story comes down to one unavoidable reality. The league is standing at a crossroads. What John Harbaugh is asking for isn't outrageous, it's revealing. He's not chasing headlines and he's not posturing for leverage. He's drawing a line and saying the quiet part out loud. Winning in today's NFL requires clarity, authority, and long-term alignment. Anything less is just controlled chaos. For the Cleveland Browns, this moment is bigger than a coaching hire. It's a referendum on identity. Are they willing to finally trust a proven football mind? Or will fear of losing control keep them trapped in the same loop they've been stuck in for decades? Because if Cleveland says yes, the ripple effects won't stop there. A coach with full authority, paired with a young quarterback like Shedeur Sanders, represents a power shift the league has tried to avoid for years. It challenges the idea that players must wait quietly for influence. It challenges front offices that operate by committee. And it challenges owners who want accountability without surrendering control. If it works, it becomes a blueprint. Other elite coaches will follow. Young quarterbacks will demand better environments instead of just bigger contracts. Teams will be forced to choose between stability and micromanagement. The NFL won't collapse, but it will change. And if it fails, the league will point to it as a warning. They'll say coaches can't be trusted with that much power. They'll say young quarterbacks need to stay in their lane. They'll tighten control and return to business as usual. That's what makes this moment so pivotal. This isn't about whether Harbaugh can coach. His resume already answered that. It's not even about whether Sanders can play. Time will take care of that. This is about whether the NFL is ready to evolve, or whether it will keep resisting change until it's forced. Cleveland now holds that decision in its hands. Say yes, and they become the team that dared to rewrite the rules. Say no, and they remain a cautionary tale watching someone else succeed, with the very thing they were afraid to try. Either way, the league is watching. Because the next era of the NFL won't be decided by one game or one season. It'll be decided by who controls the future.